Alright, Hotep family. Uh, Today I want to go over something with you that like almost needs to be said. We haven't really advanced on our understanding of what people call racism in the last 50 years. Alright? Let me just center this video. This is a black paper on white racism, part 1 from 1971. This is the video that's listed by Afro-Marxists. You can see it right here. Afro-Marxists listed this video, and it's really almost something that, like, this video, if I were a crying man, would cause me to cry. If I were a crying man, this video would cause me to cry, because what you're going to hear is these are intellectuals, but you're going to hear the same things you're here today, but you're also going to hear a lot of weakness, unfortunately. And this is, some of these, like at least one of these ancestors we know. Like, we know Dr. Clarke. We know Dr. Clarke to be, one of the most remarkable historians, the grandmaster of African history, one of the grandmasters of African history, along with, Dr. Ben and them, and Dr. Jackson, of course. But this is phenomenal, and I just want to play it and pause it and play it and pause it. If you want to just hear the video yourself, the link is in the description. Hopefully it stays up long enough by the time you hear it. But otherwise, let's go right into it, because it's something to make you cry if you're a crying person. If you're an emotional person, this is it. Of course, this is the intro.
Good evening. This week and next, we will present a black paper on white racism. Frequently, the definition and effects of racism are greatly misunderstood. Certainly, the impact on blacks can only be described by us. An operational definition of individual racism is subordination of a person or group because of race. But we will focus on the institutional practice of racism, when a group is subordinated by factors indirectly related to race. An example would be a union with all white members. You can only get in the union if a member sponsors you, and automatically whites select one another. So this pattern of selection automatically keeps blacks out. The union is white in the first place, because its membership reflects the leftover patterns of slavery. Therefore, racist behavior is both intentional and unintentional.
Alright, so here's two things I want you to understand. I mean, actually, I think Dr. Clarke is going to explain it pretty well later. But the reality, like, one of the things I don't want us people to keep doing is going back onto slavery and blaming slavery, and saying slavery is the root of every, issue that affects us today. The one thing I want to say first is that if you have an organization, even if it's a union, an economic organization, you should practice recommending people on an individual basis. Word of mouth, reputation, character already being drawn. Now, those character maybe shouldn't be along racial lines, you might reason, but I would say that if I have a black organization, I would practice the same sort of discrimination, and I don't see why a people in power wouldn't practice something that would be important to maintaining their own power, and not just maintaining their own power, but also maintaining the code of conduct and the code of character that they would require to keep that power in their hands. So this is not really an example of racism. And just to go on the slavery comment, the reality being that regardless of whether a population were enslaved or not, they're not. If you're trying to practice good formation, good organization, you're not opening yourself to outside groups. You know, so that's again, you know, it's really like I'm gonna struggle with this because this is not something. This is not. This is the trouble is this, that the thinking here is parallel to the 2020s. What I just said is radical in a sense, and it shouldn't be, because right now it should be common sense.
Our institutions mostly involve unsuspecting individuals who are part of a racist pattern. All definitions of black people's standards and values have been defined by whites in a society basically European. As simple as it may seem, we have never made any definition of our condition, beauty standards, social etiquette.
And let's just parallel right here. Look, we've never made a definition of ourselves, our beauty standards, so on and so forth. As if Carlos Cooks never happened. As if Marcus Garvey never happened. It's amazing that we, and of course this is in 1971, so it's like as if the 60s never happened. It's amazing that we are constantly going backwards. It's amazing.
Even our names have been given us by white culture. To make an authoritative statement of our concept of Christianity, history, education, values and cultures, war, colonialism and imperialism, and psychological development, and how these institutions operate in a white racist society, 6 black scholars and philosophers have been invited to present positions and analyses of these topics. With me tonight are John HENRIK Clarke, an associate professor of African and Afro-American history at Hunter College in New York. Mr. Clarke is also author of 11 books, including Harlem, USA. Preston Wilcox, head of the Education Workshop of the Congress of African People, is president of Afram Associates, a black educational consultant firm, and is an outstanding author. Reverend Albert Clay is pastor of the Shrine of the Black Madonna in Detroit, Michigan, and an advocate of black Christian nationalism. He is author of the soon-to-be-published book, Black Christian Nationalism, New Directions for the Black Church. Brother Clarke?
I'd like to begin by establishing some kind of a frame of reference. Exactly what are we talking about? And I think in order to do this, I'm going to try to dismiss the subject, then come back to it and deal with it. There is no such thing as a race. Nature created no races. Man created races, racial classifications, and he had his own reason for doing it. Now, who benefited from this artificial creation at first? Who benefits from it now? Now, let's look at the historical roots of this whole thing, and you're not going to understand it until you understand the implications, the far-reaching effects of the opening up of the so-called New World, Christopher Columbus and other thugs coming, suppressing the Indians, and finding a justification for this kind of thing. Let's look at Europe in the 15th and the 16th century, because racism has its roots in that second rise of Europe in the 15th and the 16th century. They had to justify what they were going to do to most of mankind. They were about to take over the whole world. Now, there's a myth about an argument about whether the world was round or flat. That's an old wives' tale. The European had gained enough knowledge and had enough guns, and he had been hungry enough within the body of Europe until he decided that he was going to go out and take the world, be it round or flat. Now, in order to understand the religious basis of...
I mean, I know. I really can't. One of the things that really turned me off about the African American community in general is, or the conscious community, is this obsession with Europe and Europeans, and I understand it to a degree. And the thing is that like Dr. Clarke does it well, perfectly, but then we continue it 50 years later, and that's really where it would drive me.
Racism, we have to go back to a papal bull that the Pope issued in 1455 in an argument between Portugal and Spain. He turned to them impatiently and said, "You are both authorized to reduce to servitude all in infidel people. And it just so happens that most of the so-called infidels were non-European people, non-white people. Europe not only had its basis for racism, it had its basis for the slave trade, and this same basis would be good in the colonial system that followed. Racism was created to justify the slave trade, to justify the colonial system, and to justify the utter ruthlessness that had to go into the making of modern capitalism.
I want to say this actually, because I know it's not, it's not proper, but I think one thing that we should add, or that should be added in the modern sense, is the reality that the European was enslaved before he went out and enslaved Africans. So the quote-unquote infidels that just so happened to be non-Europeans were in fact people who enslaved Europeans beforehand. And then also I think the idea that white people had enough guns prior to the colonization of the world, or even that they had the outlook of colonizing the world, I think it has some truism to it. Actually, I don't know to what extent it has any truism. In the sense that how would white people have known that they would conquer the world in advance? It seems more like they were looking to have colonies. They were looking to get colonies, or they were looking to enslave people because they themselves were enslaved, or more accurately, they fought against their enslaver, and after 700 years, won and got the technology that their enslavers had, but also the maps, and obviously they went around exploring, but they also said, let me conquer and let me get the wealth of the world, just as the people before me had the wealth of Europe, or whatever you would call you could get in Europe. I don't think the image of white people just were sitting down, they had all these guns, and they were like, okay, we're going to colonize the world. It doesn't even honestly, I wouldn't even think that it's realistic. Now, I could imagine in 1970 that might have been something that seemingly seemed realistic, but one of the things that would trouble me is the fact that this is still how we look at things. Notwithstanding the fact that at least for realism, I mean, like what I just told you about the Europeans going through slavery and all that kind of stuff, you would expect that would be more central as to what was the motivation of them empowering themselves, and even having guns, and how did they get these ships, except through the Moors, who had the ships, and who had the trans-Saharan slave trade. And then, of course, when you talk about racism, you have the Arabs. They had this terrible program that lasted for maybe 1,000 years in Africa, or at least by then it lasted about 1,000 years, from 711 to from the 8th century to the 15th century. So maybe 600, 700 years too, where they were trading Africans, but they were also trading Europeans. So it's just like, I don't know, like it's weird that we're still at this same point, and it's okay because it's Dr. Clarke, we would say, but it's still weird, and you're gonna see further when they talk about Christianity, like, ugh.
Let me begin by suggesting that the clearest evidence of racism in education is the essential control over black education, both in so-called integrated settings and in segregated settings, by white people, many of whom are incapable of responding to the people they're educating as people, many of whom are incapable of understanding the culture and the history of the people they're educating, many of whom really do not see any kind of responsibility for involving these communities in managing their own education. The second kind of aspect is the...
And this is, like, you heard that, right? Because I'm telling you, you're going to hear the same thing today. That's what's going to be frustrating. The idea that... Because I just read earlier, if you checked out the channel, you saw that I read Cabral's Portugal, like how Portugal was treating Africans in throughout its colonies, throughout its territories, if you will. You know, whether it was Mozambique, Angola, or Guinea, or San Tome, right? He was saying that the education in in these Portuguese colonies, right, in Africa, was such that they were just doing certain things. As say, they were teaching you, literacy, but they were also teaching you, to do military service, to pay your taxes, and to, follow the European manners, right? And so to hear black people complain that white people are not teaching them about themselves, about their culture, meanwhile, even in Africa they wouldn't do that, because tactically or intelligently, it wouldn't even make any sense for them to do that. There's this other lecturer who said that, once upon a time white people, now I don't know, I don't believe it anymore, but he said once upon a time white folk would, like before they would split up our families, they would even tell black folk that, oh, you're from this great empire, you're from that great empire. And when you do that, when you tell people that they're from these great empires, what it does is that it made them more rebellious. And these white people were saying, no, instead of telling people that they're from these great empires, what you should do is you should break up their families and tell them that they're nothing, that they came from nothing. But it might not be a true story. But what it does is it kind of tells you what you could do to socially control people. So my thing is that if you're trying to guilt white people into doing things that would make them better exercise social control over a population that should have every sort of antagonism against them, doesn't even make any sense, particularly because white people even have educational system, like in their education, they also do not teach their own people the actual history of anything, So I mean, I never read the book, but I've always heard about it, from the liberals and the leftists, if you will. But there's this white guy who I think he says has a book called like People's History of America or something like that. But basically, it's this idea of retelling history, but from the perspective of the masses, or through mass action and labor movements and so on and so forth. And of course, white people don't tell that history either. So the very fact that they wouldn't tell white people the real history, because history has lessons in it, right? It behooves us to think that white people should or could or would teach black people the real history of black folk, or not just because they wouldn't even know it, or even if they did know it, it's just, why would you teach people, oh yes, you come from a, like why would you tell people, oh, here's a warrior tradition you had, or here's when you revolted against, terrible actions, or here's what they did in Portugal and how the people organized against Portugal and eventually got their independence. Why would you, organized in Guinea-Bissau and eventually got their independence. Why would you tell the people that? Like, to what do you gain? What do you gain from teaching people to attack you, or teaching people how to fight you, or how to get together and fight you? There's another story I don't really believe is true, and I'm just gonna go really quickly over it, where I think it was that guy who writes Powernomics. He says that there's this story where black folk started a insurrection off of the Virginia flag. So the Virginia flag has this image of at the time it had an image of a black, I think it was a black man or a black woman or something standing over, no, just like a white woman standing over a white man, like with her foot on his neck or something like that. And it was Sic Semper Tyrannis, and it's like, this is what happens to tyrants, right? Or such happens to tyrants, right? And apparently there was the insurrection was such that black people would just walk around, show the image, point to the image, and they understood what to do, But I think it might have been like thwarted or something. But it was this idea that, if you have this propaganda of, good triumphing over evil, or justice triumphing over injustice, that you wouldn't even want black folk to understand that very concept. That's part of the reason why you don't want black people reading, or even reading some parts of these biblical texts, if you will. But that's what it is. It's like you're it doesn't make any sense to complain that people are not doing things that would limit their control over you if their whole objective is to keep you under control. That's what I'm trying to say.
The ability of white communities to keep black people out of their communities and still yet exercise some influence over the education in black communities. That is, even when there's no blacks in the white community, whites are still having some kind of influence over the education in black communities.
Of course.
Third example is the way in which our schools are organized. Despite the fact that we know we live in a racist society, the schools continue to be organized as though racism does not exist.
Of course.
There's been no real shift of power within the schools. There's been no effective change in the content.
And you're still talking about this.
There's been no forthright recognition of the politics involved in education. For instance, in New York City, about 55% of the students are black and Puerto Rican, yet we have one black and one Puerto Rican member on a school board of 5 people. So 3 white people are making decisions that affect 55% of people whom they may not be able to respect as people.
You see what I'm saying? Like, of course, white people would want to have control over the education of their population. Why would you not want to have? It's like imagine this. Imagine South Africa, right? Gets its control over its community, right? It has this large white population. Do you now if you say to yourself, well, let's make everybody educate themselves, right? And you're trying to hold power over them, right? If you're trying to hold power over them or keep them under control, you don't want to know what they're teaching themselves in the white part of town? You understand? You don't want to have a say in what the white people are learning? Or you do? Because the thing is that you sound like you don't want to know, which is fine. If it sounds like, but that's the innocence that you're also saying that you don't like. You know? White people are organizing right now, like for instance, little militias, where they're teaching, their youth to, fight black folk, and that's fine. I understand it, right? But if I were in power, right, do you think I would want that to happen? Particularly if it was a large population? But of course you do.
Reverend Clay? Well, I think the basic reason or symptom or proof for the racism of the Christian church is the simple fact that white people have pretended for so long that Jesus was white, and that they've had the necessity to interpret Jesus as being white, when essentially white Christianity is racially, is historically false and theologically absurd, and practically, in terms of its effect on black people, it's a debasing institution that enslaves black people.
Well,
I think we have to understand, though, that we're not making moral judgments here. Any institution that exists in any society exists to serve the interests of the people who set it up. And Christianity began as a black man's religion. It's an African religion. We have to remember that Israel went into Egypt with...
You hear this ridiculousness? And by the way, I think J.A. Rogers also says this whole argument here about the Israel, blah, blah, blah. But he's going to promote Christianity. A black man, and he's going to say it's black, and Dr. Clark's going to back him up, and it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense, but...
70 people, and after approximately 750 years came out with over 2 million people, and hordes of other slaves who came out and became also part of the emerging new nation of Israel. So Israel, the biblical Israel, was a black nation, an African nation, that came out of Africa and kept constant ties with Africa. And so we have to remember then that Jesus was a black Messiah, not a white Messiah, and he comes out of the whole historical background of Africa, of African traditions, of African history, of African culture, the concept of communalism, the concept of the chosen people, the concept of kingdom of God on earth. All these things were out of African tradition, not out of the white man's tradition. And Jesus was essentially a revolutionary Messiah who was trying to lead a black people in a revolt, in a struggle and conflict with the white Gentile oppressor. So the whole church has to be viewed from the point of view of the white oppressor. The white oppressor has one kind of Christianity, has one kind of church. The black church has to become independent and go back to the historic African roots of Christianity, because the slave church that the white man set up for black people tends to continue the enslavement of black people. So the black church has to become again a revolutionary instrument in the hands of black people, controlled by black people, fighting as Jesus fought for the liberation of black people against white Gentile oppression.
This is such a grift.
I'd like to continue from Reverend Cleage's point and deal briefly with image, because image is the paramount factor in keeping racism alive. Now, exactly when did the Christian church become white? In as much as Christ is described in early literature as being swarthy and having hair like sheep's wool, and that's surely not the Caucasian's hair. The first image of the church, the first image of the Madonna was the black Madonnas, and these black Madonnas were very prevalent in the churches of Europe. Up until the 16th and the 17th century, there was no white Madonnas in the churches of Europe. And some of the churches of Europe to this very day have black Madonnas. All right. At what point did Christianity become all white? And at what point did Christ become a blonde, blue-eyed person that hangs in your churches and with a haircut and a uniform would probably be a good Nazi? All right. One thing the Jews seem to have forgotten is that the picture of Christ, as in present-day literature, is an insult to them, because there's nothing particularly Jewish about him, physically or otherwise. All right. Now, another thing we're going to have to look at seriously is that when the Europeans projected themselves out into the broader world, they not only colonized most of mankind, they colonized the teaching of history itself. And gradually, so many things black became white.
I'd like to just say one more word about the when did.
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting. I like, a lot of it seemed to be like forced quips. You know, like, for instance, I didn't even think that Jesus, you know, the white Jesus, if you will, is even shown to be blue-eyed or blonde. So it kind of doesn't even make, like, it didn't even make any sense for that quip. But, you know, I don't even know, like, I can't even, like, the obsession with the Christian church, because that was another thing that really turned me off about the black conscious community back when I was when I was new to YouTube. So maybe it was like 10 years ago, which was like, they always debating Christianity, they're always talking about religion, and I know that people still do that. I just kind of tuned that out, kind of blocked it out. But, you know, it's like, this is not even, like, you have to look at these people as if they are African scholars, because they are African scholars, right? And imagine African scholars sitting down, discussing and debating European scholarship almost exclusively, and trying to include themselves in it, you know, desperately, when it's already nonsense. You know, I mean, if I were white and I was sitting down and the intellectuals of the opposing race, the black race, were sitting down trying to place themselves in my spiritual system, right? I would just be flattered, but I'd also think these people have nothing. These people have nothing going on. It'd be like if the white folk, if black folk conquered white people, okay? And let's say we're Yoruba. Yoruba people conquered England, you know? And then the white folk, the white intellectuals, were sitting down debating whether or not, you know, let's say, I want to say Oludumare, right? Whether or not Oludumare, they're saying Oludumare is really a European. Okay? They just want to fit into, and they're saying, you know, the traditions of Oludumare really go along with, you know, English kind of, like, it would be, like, you would not be proud of it. You would, like, if white people would not be proud of it. They would say, how could we, if we're really trying to cling on to our own traditions, we are not even going to dignify the traditions of our enemies. you know. But here they are. This is not just like random people. One of them is Dr. Clarke. Like, one of them is Dr. Clarke.
Christianity become white. The process by which Christianity became gradually to be interpreted as being white began at a very early point with Apostle Paul, who wrote the epistles of the New Testament, and who was, even at that time, with black Israel, black Jews, an Uncle Tom Jew. He was an Uncle Tom black Jew, and he wanted to identify with white Gentile world. He prided himself on being a Pharisee, but more on being having Roman citizenship. So as soon as he had sunstroke on the Damascus Road and said he's been converted, he started out to take the Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, to the Gentile world. Now, he could not take the revolutionary teachings that Jesus had actually taught, because Jesus was a zealot, and they were engaged in revolution, I mean open revolution. He was one of the zealot leaders at that time, so he couldn't.
I mean, here's the thing too. I want you to understand this. One thing is that obviously this character Jesus didn't exist. The other thing is that if you're talking about revolution, right? This character Jesus does not take over any land. He doesn't set up a real government. He's far from a revolutionary. He is like he if he were real, he would be a grifter. He would be one of those people in those suicide cults, you know, who say, hey, you can go on a spaceship if you kill yourself, you know, and watch, I'm gonna die and I'm gonna go fly up in a spaceship. Like, he would be the equivalent of that. It's
take that to the Gentile world. So he had to make an image, a symbol out of Jesus on the cross, which was compatible with the heathen symbolism of the Roman and Greco-Roman heathen world. So he made Jesus a kind of a heathen symbol that he could take to the Gentile world. And the whole writings of the Apostle Paul tend then to destroy the basic African background of Christianity and to make it compatible with the Greco-Roman heathen world.
But you still took it up.
It began there. But the actual identification of Christianity as being a white religion didn't really take place until the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, when the pictures were being painted and paid for by the Catholic Church. At that point, white people had decided to declare black people inferior. And so the whole concept of Jesus being black or the Madonna being black was unacceptable to white people at all.
Hold on a second. And this is the thing. I see. You go back to what I said earlier about how the fact that white folk were colonized up until this 15th, 16th century mark, where they then put their religion or went back into their own books and got their own religion and put white images on it. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Essentially, they did not keep the images of what would be their oppressors, or the images of the religion of the people who they're against. Now in the framework of quote unquote racism, you as the victim, it's like, oh, they didn't want to have the real black representation. But what if you had a role in the colonization of Europe? Then what? Then you're no longer a victim as much as, and I'm not going to say the white man is a victim per se, but I'm going to say that, you know, there's a dynamic in this world where if you lose your footing, somebody else takes your place. So you have to make your footing strong and keep yourself up there, and this is exactly what white people are doing to us. And the fact that we're looking to be a part of their culture should be abominable. But the thing is this, again, this is something that you could see this same conversation going on today. And so again, the question being, you know, why haven't we intellectually advanced?
A whole new type of slavery was beginning to emerge. The old type of slavery in Egypt, Joseph was a slave who rose to be second only to Pharaoh. A whole different concept of slavery. You were a slave only in the terms that your labor was taken. But gradually the white man declared that anyone who was non-white, who was enslaved, was declared to be inferior, therefore had a whole different kind of existence. So the whole gradual thing was a part of the slavery process that Dr. Clarke mentioned, a part of the betrayal of the Apostle Paul, and a part of the fall of Jerusalem and the fort, and when Jews were scattered all over the world, we have to remember one thing I think is very important, that the white Jews that we see today have no bloodline connection with the Jews of the biblical period. They were converted to Judaism in Europe and in Russia. They were converted and have no bloodline connection with the black Jews who make up the biblical Israel that the Bible writes about and of which Jesus was a part.
Well, what happened to black Jews?
The black Jews are still in existence. There are black Jews in America. There are black Jews all over Africa. There are black Jews in Palestine. There are black Jews everywhere. Diane's daughter complained not more than 2 years ago that black Jews had moved on either side of her house, and therefore her property had depreciated in Palestine. Black Jews had depreciated her property. Jews had moved directly from Palestine to India, and the community celebrated its 1900th anniversary or something, and they had white Jews who had emigrated from Europe and black Jews who had originally come from Jerusalem at the fall of Jerusalem, had an uninterrupted straight line of connection from the fall of Jerusalem to India. All over the world there are black Jews, but the Zionist Jews who had been converted to Judaism have taken over the control of the definition of what Judaism is, as white people do with anything. If they come into it, they take it over and define what it is, as you stated in your introductory statement. So we have to remember that white Jews, when you see them on the street, are not the Jews of the biblical period. And that sometimes confuses black people who ought to be black Christian nationalists.
Yeah, all right. So that's something that, like I've heard that, and that's the thing that's coming to me. It's like, I don't know what is conspiracy theory anymore. I don't know what's real anymore. Because like I said, I heard this same thing, but I don't even know if I heard it only because it's derivative of this kind of conversation that's already happened. I can't even say what's true and what's not true anymore. But I do believe that, yes, the white Jews did in fact convert, or something along those lines. I've heard that. I think I've read that somewhere. I didn't even realize I was looking for comments. I didn't know there were any. So Harsh Reality Podcast is with us, so that's great. You know, Harsh Reality Podcast, along with Queen's Council and of course Bitter Medicine Podcast, are on the KWAZ radio program. So I'm just gonna go and read this. Harsh Reality says, exactly, a minority group should never expect to be treated fairly in institutions dominated by the ruling class. To think otherwise is to be wrapped in juvenile idealism. Exactly. I mean, like, as a group, you should not expect to advance above the majority. A minority should not, as a group, expect to advance above the majority, particularly if the majority is organized well. Because whatever you could do as a minority, the majority can do better. One. And two, well, that's if you're both organized, right? If the majority is organized, then you should have no chance. Now, as an individual, obviously, you could advance. So somebody like me can advance. Like, I could reach higher educational levels than other people. But if the school system was filled with me, and I actually had a problem with it, I could make it stop. In the sense of, let's say right now we know that the quote-unquote Oriental is considered a model minority in America, but part of the thing is that the Oriental also cannot be political, and they're not population-wise, they're no political threat anywhere. So white people feeling outraged that they do surpass them inside of educational systems, what they do then is they then limit their migration, or they portray them as a negative entity. And the same thing happens with quote unquote African immigrants who might excel educationally in America, but they're limited in number, and they are also cast negatively and sometimes you see it by our own people, but it's like but it could be also a tactic by others. Lowland Prophet says it's all by design, and then I said something. I didn't know anybody wrote anything, so I said the video is in the link. I said the video is in the link so that in case people don't want to be interrupted too much. It's a really short video. It's a 30-minute video, but if you don't want to be interrupted too much, that's fine. I understand. But like this video almost made me cry. That's why I wanted to get up here and share it with you guys. But I just wanted to share it. I wanted to go over it with you. So the Harsh Reality Podcast says, bro, this dude said the black church should be used to fight white Gentile oppression. What the talk about an oxymoron? Yeah, it's exactly. It's like it doesn't even. And the thing is this, that because again, this was from 1971. There's no black church revolution that happens. You know, so you have the benefit of hindsight to say that nothing came from this movement, nothing came from this organization. Well, not nothing, but you have the hindsight to say this was a bad choice, and that's what's devastating about all of this. That this was just a plain sight grift, and it seems like, and the thing is that we just haven't advanced since then. It's depressing.
So one of the things I'm hearing from both of the brothers is that not only have whites tried to deceive blacks about the realities, but they, in effect, deceived each other about the realities. That is, I'm sitting here thinking about the institutions in society, all of which are racist, you know, which whites created, which whites have used in order to advance themselves, but never at any point stopped and recognized, for instance, that the prisons have nothing to do with rehabilitation, or that the courts, in most cases, really have nothing to do with justice.
What about schools?
And you see, that's what I'm saying. Like, okay, the prisons have nothing to do with rehabilitation. Why should white people rehabilitate you if they can work you for pennies on the dollar? You understand? Like we talk about Microsoft and McDonald's and Burger King. All of them use prison labor. Okay? So why should they rehabilitate you, make you a functional individual outside of everything, when they can just work you for pennies on the dollar? You know, instead of paying you $10 or $15 or $20 an hour, whatever it is that you feel is is your thing, they can pay you 50 cents an hour. Okay? They can pay you 50 cents an hour legally with no legal consequence and nobody really caring. So why would they not do that? You know? Why would they rehabilitate you and give you $20 an hour, give you a college education and you get, your $25 an hour or something, right? When they can just not rehabilitate you, make you a recidivist, make you continually, go back into prison and so on and so forth. Feel like that, a hot in a cot or whatever it is called, 4 hots in a cot is something that you really enjoy, and then just work you with this menial labor that fuels their economy and makes it so that their economy can remain on top. Why would they not do that? And the idea that they don't get justice in their own court system just doesn't even make any sense. Of course they get justice in their court system. You don't get justice in their court system. But why would you get justice in their court system? It's not your court system.
Specifically is a racist pattern, in your opinion, as far as the educational process or the schools is concerned?
Well, see, I would say that the overwhelming educational process that is racist is a tendency to educate people against their own interests. That is, to educate black kids to hate themselves, to educate blacks to feel alienated from their own people, to educate blacks to become advocates for the mainstream against their own people.
Well, how is that done, specifically?
No, see, the thing is, the interviewer should have said, what's wrong with that? Why would I educate you? If you're a foreign population, I mean, like let's say I go to China, right? Or let's say a large amount of us go to China, and we say, educate our children. You're China, you're a superpower, educate our children. We're in China. Now the Chinese, are they supposed to teach you to work together as an independent African unit, right? Work against Chinese oppression and Chinese so on and so, Chinese misdeeds and Chinese whatever, tell you the history of how China did this and how black people are great and how the Chinese teachers are supposed to change up everything they're doing, right? In order to teach your black kids that you had no business sending to them anyway. Does that make sense to you? You call it racism for white people to teach you like you're a little white boy, when the reality is that that's who they know how to teach. That's who they go to college to teach. You would rather them go to college to learn how to teach your kids, instead of you saying to yourself, let me teach my own kids. You want white folk to go to college and learn how to teach your kids, or teach you how to teach your kids. And then if they don't do that absurd request, you call them racist. Okay.
Well, I would say that, the traditional educational process is, number one, the concealing of the truth about history. The educating of black students away from the problems of their own community. For instance, very few black students on college campuses are enabled to use their minds to work on the problems that bedevil the black community, like sickle cell anemia, or the housing problems, the drug problems that are imposed on the black community by the outside. Very few black students on white campuses or any campus are spending their energies and their minds on trying to find solutions to those problems. In most cases,
again, you're going to their schools. Imagine you are going to their schools, and if you go to a white school, right? Why would they teach you how to deal with sickle cell anemia if they don't have sickle cell anemia to the same degree? Right? Why would their educational system focus on your problems if they built the educational system for themselves? Like you say, the housing problem, right? Or the drug problem. If they don't have a drug problem, or if they don't have a housing problem, why would it be that you go to their schools and then they would teach you about a housing problem that they don't even know anything about, that they don't have any reason to investigate, they don't have any reason to learn, they have no interest in fixing, per se? Now, of course, I understand the desire as an African person for these problems to be fixed, and I understand the desire for black people to solve these problems themselves. But what I don't understand is the logistics, right? You have white people going to school to learn how to teach a subject, and then they end up in a school, and then there's a black student in that school, or even a couple of black students in that school. Why would that white person suddenly be an expert on solving black problems if they themselves went through an educational system to teach white people? Like, logistically, it doesn't make any sense. And the thing is this, the trouble is this. Again, the trouble goes back to this. This was in 1971, so you could give it a pass. In 2020, we're talking the same damn way, where it doesn't make any logistical sense to even utter these words. It didn't make any sense in 1971. It damn sure don't make no sense in 2020. But coming in 2021, 50 years from now, from 50 years from then, we're going to be saying the same thing, unfortunately.
They're being educated, say, with a drug problem, learn how to use methadone.
No, look, let's deal with our own
and then he's making jokes.
Naivete. Until we deal with it, we're not going any place. Black people have no right to expect anything from this establishment because it wasn't set up for them. They wasn't brought to this country to be given democracy. They were brought to this country to do some work, to labor and to obey. And once the machines made a whole lot of these jobs obsolete, it tended to make a whole lot of the people obsolete.
By the way, you're going to see that Dr. Clarke is just talking the socialist line, the Marxist line.
Now, we keep worrying about the American promise and the American dream, and we forget it wasn't made to us. And the white man has not betrayed anything because he didn't promise us anything in the first place. Now, the role of institutions in a society is to reflect the power that controls that society. So we have American institutions arrayed against us, and we naively expect these institutions to reform themselves, because if they reform themselves, that's tantamount to presiding over their own demise.
I'd like to say one thing on that. I think,
and you see, he's actually saying what you would want somebody to say, but here's the trouble. It's gonna go forward. I don't know who's gonna say it, but I think he's gonna say it later, which is we should study our own systems. We should study what we're, and it's like we say the same crap 50 years later. So it was okay when he said it then. No problem there, right? But to say the same thing 50 years later, that's horrible. But we're gonna keep going.
the question you asked is how do the schools accomplish this. I mean, you were concerned about the process. I think we got to understand that there's no such thing as objective truth, which is implicit in everything Dr. Clarke says. That white people use the institutions to accomplish white purpose. The white purpose is to maintain a power position and keep everybody else in a subordinate, powerless kind of position. Now that's the institution's purpose, and that's the way it functions and how it functions. And we got to realize then that everything that the schools teach is designed to fit into that purpose.
And see, this is actually pretty good, and this is the you know, technically you would say that we've declined intellectually for the last 50 years, you know, because this is actually pretty good.
Schools teach not objective truth, but what the white man wants to project as truth. Now that's from the very kindergarten right straight on through.
For example, what?
Sociology. Sociology is not a science in the sense that it's dealing objectively with the way people live together. It's dealing with the white man's pattern of living together as the norm by which we judge how other people live. If you live like white people live, then you're living the way you are supposed to live. If not, you're either primitive or insane as a people. Psychologically, it's the same thing. Psychology does not deal with any objective kind of discussion or development of how people live or analysis of how people function as individuals, but how does the white man function? If the white man does it this way, then this is the norm by which we judge all other people. If the white man is violent, then actually all people have to be violent to be normal. If you're not violent, obviously there's something wrong with you and you should be in an insane asylum. The whole pattern that's set up as a norm for human behavior by psychologists, the whole library full of it. Psychiatrists, everybody that's dealing with it is dealing with it from a white point of view. So they teach white children, black children and white children, to look through white eyes. From the kindergarten on, the black child is beginning to look at the world and interpret it through white eyes. Everything he is wrong. Everything that exists in his community is wrong. And we ought to declare it.
And see, this is interesting, right? Because again, if you were talking about sociology, psychology, you have to realize that these are actually sciences. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do what you think I'm going to say. I'm going to say these are actually sciences that come out of Europe. Okay? And because they come out of Europe, right? Where it wasn't really a large black population at the time. You know, if you're talking about 15th, 16th century, and if there was a black population, what they were doing was they were trying to suppress and have them identify themselves outside of this population. So all the same, what I'm saying is that because it's coming from Europe, right? You would naturally be excluded. And so, like, to assert, oh yeah, you know, these white folk are racist, you know, they're trying to universalize no, what they're doing is that they are going off of their own intellectual tradition. And then for you to come out and try to find yourself in their intellectual tradition, that's where you fuck up. Don't mean to curse, but that's where you mess up. Okay? Not the white boy. The white boy doesn't mess up in going through his own tradition. He doesn't mess up by looking through Freud or Pavlov or Durkheim or, you know, whomever else. He doesn't mess up. You mess up. Like, let's say Du Bois messes up by looking at Durkheim, Freud, Pavlov. You understand? That, you know, this is why I would, you know, some people don't like that I critique some of the quote-unquote psychologists in the black community, but this is why I, you know, particularly in my book, in my literature, I talk about how, what's his face, I think it's Ayanna Bello, or something like, I think it's Ayanna Bello, where she discusses, you know, the Haitian evolution, and she's saying that Toussaint and Dessalines represented, I think it was Legba and Oyo, or maybe Oshan, yeah, Legba and Oshan, and she's saying, and when she articulates this, you know, and of course I repeat this in the book, but when she articulates this, what she's saying is, like, she's breaking down a real African psychology, you know, where she's saying that there's a mindset along the lines of Legba, which is an orator, an organizer, a person who brings people together. And then there's the psychology around the people who are like Ogun, right? Who are warriors, who are fighters, who are trying to drive away the enemy, right? That's real African-centered psychology, real African-centered philosophy, right? Or sociology or whatever, right? And then what we have inside of this quote-unquote American scene is where there are quote-unquote black scholars who look at things from a white lens and say, why aren't we here? Or here's what you guys have left us out. You know? Like the Legba and Ogun thing, that had nothing to do with white folk. And it was just straight out of an African imagination, straight out of an African passion, straight out of an African way of being, right? This other thing of, oh, well, this is what Freud got wrong, and this is what Pavlov is really saying. And that kind of stuff, that's not African-centered, that's European-centered. You know, it's centered on the European imagination. And unfortunately, that's what, you know, passes for psychology today. And then you're going to see, like this brother, you know, you heard him, he was speaking well, he was saying some points, and then he's going to say this.
That white music really is no good. That white psychology is no good. The white man either acts like we do or he's insane. White sociology is no good. The very structure of white society indicates that white people, obviously, in social structure are either insane or they're abnormal. So we have to project then a black psychology, a black sociology, a black music, a black history that takes in the realities and that is essentially sound, as opposed to the mythology that the white man has developed out of his own ignorance, for one thing, out of his non-creativity, because the white man has never created anything. He's stolen things but never created anything. He cannot actually deal with history because history is a recital of his total failure and his total absence of making any genuine contribution to the world.
Yawn, you know, but like, you understand what I'm saying. This, like, it's like, oh, no, you know, the white man's no good, his music is garbage, his things blah, blah, like, it's so weak. You know, it reminds me of this quote that I think Malcolm X says. He might be that he got it from Elijah Muhammad, I don't know, but I don't like to give Elijah Muhammad any credit, so I'll just give Malcolm X the credit. So, Malcolm X says, do not tell a person their glass is dirty. Show them what a clean glass looks like. You know? Now, obviously, that's probably from an older term, obviously from an older thing. Who knows? But the point I would want to say is that this whole thing of, you know, okay, these white folk, they have their sociology, they have their psychology. So what we have to do is we have to say that their sociology is crap and their psychology is crap. It's like you're still defining yourself around white folk. You know? Like you even see how they're dressed, you know, dressed in these suits and the ties, and, you know, they got their cuts and all that. You know, it's like you're defining yourself in this paradigm of whiteness while claiming to be against it. You know? But here you are, a reverend of their church, a reverend of their spiritual system. You know, not of the Yoruba, not of the Igbo, not of the Akan, not of the anything, right? You know, whatever. I know probably some people are gonna say, Zosa, whatever, right? You know, whatever it is, you're not a descendant of any of that. I mean, you're not propagating any of that. What you're doing is you're propagating a message just so that you could say, oh, we're different from them, or, you know, they took it from us, and you know, blah, blah, blah. It's still the whole victim thing, you know, oh, their music's not good, which is not really going to resonate with people because, you know, one of the things that I noticed with our people is that, you know, we bump our people bump white music. I don't bump white music. I mean, I played it sometimes, but, like, you know, our people bump white music, you know, so they're going to play, you know, white Madonna, you know what I'm saying? You know, not black Madonna, they're gonna play white Madonna, you know? They're gonna play, you know, Bruno Mars, you know, some people are not gonna say he's white or whatever, but still. They're gonna play Bruno Mars, they're gonna play their Cardi B, they're gonna play their Justin Timberlake. You know, I don't know the stars of today, but you understand what I'm saying. Lady Gaga, they're gonna play this Adele, they're definitely gonna play her, you know, but that's the point. You know, so the idea that you're gonna be like, oh, they're girls, like just defining yourself against them, right, is like a weak resistance. It's again, you have to look at it from the perspective of what if things were reversed? You know? What if we were the power and this was a panel of white people? Would white people really sit by and be this weak and try to, you know, dress in African attire and would they dress in African attire and say, yeah, we're the real Yorubas. They're not really Yorubas, or no, they're not gonna do that. Or if they do that, we're just gonna laugh. We're gonna sit by and laugh and say, man, those are some dumb people. Everything that white people do, everything that black people do is bad, and blah, blah. And I'm not saying that white people didn't do that, but they've done a lot more since, at least.
Find a black psychology, a black sociology. Where will we use these?
Where would we use them first to unscramble our own mixed up mind. If we could understand that black psychology is the psychology that the black man has to have if he's going to escape from powerlessness in a white man's world. Now, the struggle is a struggle between black people for power and white people to keep power. Now, all we're dealing with is a power struggle. Every institution that the white man has, he uses in this power struggle. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing immoral about it. Any people would do that. When we get on top, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to use every institution to perpetuate black power. And the white man's going to have to fight up from the bottom again for another, 100 million years trying to get back to a position of power. There's nothing wrong with fighting for power, but the thing that's wrong is for powerless people to accept their powerlessness and to accept the definition by which they are maintained powerless and to accept the institutions which perpetuate their power.
Like Christianity. Come on.
Powerlessness. So that's why I think the black church has to become a power base for black people in changing this total institutional conception structure that black people are living in.
You heard that. Like Harsh Reality Podcast said earlier, the dude said the black church to fight white gentle. Like, why are you talking about the black church if you're against white people's power institutions? And I'm not saying don't have your own spiritual institution, but I'm saying have your own spiritual institution, not the white boys. Come on.
We've got to use it as a base to spin off all the institutions that black people need that come from a black perspective, a black orientation, and are concerned with black power as opposed to white power.
Let's go back to this value, and I think I don't think we've gone over it too well. We need to look at what kind of societies that black people come out of.
And you see how he's asking this question now? Actually, I want to go back a little bit. When you talk about power and all that stuff, this is the same rhetoric that's going on today, where black people are like, oh, we got to be different. We got to do this. We got to build our own institution. We got to do. And the thing is this, when I talk about power, I make it clear to you, okay? When you're talking about power, you're talking about nations, okay? You're talking about sovereignty. You're talking about governments. You're talking about ruling your own people with your own rules, your own laws, your own courts, all that kind of stuff. These people sitting down, unfortunately, no disrespect to them, they're not just talking about power. If you're talking about power and you're going to the white boys' school, then you're not talking about power. If you're talking about power and you're worried about how the white boy is teaching kids, you're not talking about power. Okay, if you're talking about power and you're talking about, oh, well, all the laws are against us in the courts and there's no justice in the thing, you're not talking about power. Because again, if I'm going to China and I'm talking about how the Chinese have laws against blah, 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 and this and I don't like that law and I don't like blah, 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 then I'm talking about Chinese power. Duh. Okay? If I'm talking about, the white man's court, I'm talking about white power, crazy. You're talking about your own power. You're talking about black power. And this is the confusion that still remains with us as a people. The fact that we do not understand what black power is. Obviously, that's where I plug my stuff. But, we're going to keep going. Dr. Clark's going to say something.
Happened before this interference. Now, we came out of basic pluralistic societies, but we came out of sharing societies where nobody was very rich and nobody at all was poor.
And see, that's what I'm saying right here. So this is what Dr. Clark's going to do, and I'm just really like, I don't even know what to say about this, because he's coming from this socialist mindset, a really imaginative socialist mindset, and I know people are not going to like this, because, y'all don't like me talking about any of the elders and all that stuff. I understand, but, this is a socialist imagination of this utopia where nobody was rich, which doesn't even make any sense, given the fact that we know that there was, quote unquote, there was like ownership of individuals in a sense, or there were people who had, quote unquote, slaves. Okay, we know that there were people who amassed wealth. We know that there are people who, like for instance, we just know that this thing happened in Africa. Now, you could say, well, maybe this happened after. Maybe this happened after these quote-unquote pluralistic societies. But again, you have ancient Kemet where, if you go to the tombs of Kemet, there's tons of wealth hoarded. There's tons of economic, like there's not everybody was rich. Now, of course, they had a social welfare. Of course, they had this kind of stuff. But to say that there's nobody had wealth in a community that had wealth, that had wealth disparity is just remarkable. Particularly because this is like a world-class historian, so it's just almost mind-boggling. And I kind of want to just rewind this a little bit. I know I shouldn't do that, but I just want to rewind so that you guys could hear him in full. All right.
Black perspective, a black orientation, and are concerned with black power as opposed to white power.
Let's go back to this value, and I think I don't think we've gone over it too well. We need to look at what kind of societies did black people come out of? What happened before this interference? Now, we came out of basic pluralistic societies, but we came out of sharing societies where nobody was very rich and nobody at all was poor. Now, an African in these societies would no more kill a deer and say, this is mine, than he would fly, because he didn't think that way. He thought of all property as belonging to the total community. Now, we were brought into a society as slaves just at the time the concept of private property and capitalism was getting well under.
All right, yeah. So hold on a second. I'm just like, I don't even know if there's. Let me just check something. Apparently, there's like one kind of deer in Africa, which is the Barbary stag. But I'm only saying that. Oh, sorry, I forgot I was sharing this. I forgot I was sharing my screen. All right. Like, here's the thing that I want to say about this. Like, this is like, it's just like the idea of the public. Like, again, this is the socialist rewriting of African history. I know you're like, hey, this is a way better historian than you, Oni, and that's true, right? But there's still the socialism there, right? Where we're gonna say that there was no private ownership on the continent prior to the European, the European coming in. It just doesn't really make sense. This is an authority. This is somebody that we're going to quote. This is somebody that we're going to cite. It doesn't make any sense to say there's no, like, that if you killed a deer, you didn't feel like that deer was yours, but it was the whole community's. And again, the whole community's also, like, what's a community? Because again, it wouldn't be the whole race, it'd be the whole community, or if that. But it's just mind-boggling. Now, of course, I'm not going to say that. I mean, I can say it this way. I've seen what was the Maroons, right? I've seen the Maroons go on a hunting expedition. Now, if you're going on a hunting expedition as a group, right? The men go out and they go hunting as a group, as 5 or 10 or 20 men go out together, and one of the men is an exceptional hunter, right? The reality is that regardless, the meat is going to be shared among everybody in the village back home, because you're going to hunt for the whole village, right? So that has its merit. But again, there's the thing that we also have to separate between is just the level of civilizations in Africa. So there's going to be the civilization that relies on male hunting parties, right? And then there's going to be the metropolis, the big cities, right? And those existed too. And the thing is that the economic system, the economic structure of this hunter-gatherer kind of, or even the economic system of the people who, the hunter-gatherers, wouldn't necessarily be the same as the economic system of the agriculturalists, particularly those who might have their own plots of land. Because like I said again, you go to Sunjata's story, or not just Sunjata, but you go to the story of like what slavery was in Africa, when you understand that, actually Sunjata's story might be a good one. So if you go to Sunjata's story, particularly his constitution, in the constitution, it says that you would give, if an enslaved person, right, or if an enslaved person were to like watch the cows or something, right? Then every third cow born would go to them, right? To the enslaved person. So that would be like their income in a sense. Like if they're doing a good job at breeding the cows or whatever, then every third cow is going to go to them. So they get 33% of their labor in a sense, right? But that also means that not all the cows. That also means that the other 2 cows belong to the person, who technically would be the enslaver in this example, right? But that also, like, just to say that doesn't mean that it's community cows, if that makes sense. To say that, the idea of this socialist paradise that was pre-European civilization doesn't add up. Particularly because Sunjata comes from a time pre-European civilization. Now, not pre-Islamic civilization, but again, there's like a different stage because Sunjata is ruling an empire, right? And maybe these small villages that go on hunting parties of like 20, people, they not necessarily, hoard, the hunting, the hunting spoils because it's like 100 people in the village, But if you're talking about an empire of like 200,000 people, right? The idea, everything is everybody's, doesn't really add up at all, And it's just a whole different epoch, a whole different economic system, and that's something that we as an African people should start to take into serious consideration.
Way with the backing of the child. Now there is a clash between the values of the best values of the society we came out of and the society that enslaved us. And too many of us are tied up with these values, the sacredness of private property. What is so sacred about private property? What is...
Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. I told you, it's a socialist rhetoric. So, as K.W. Don says, Mansa Musa was a private owner of wealth. Exactly. But then you hear this guy, he's like, what's so sacred about private property? What's so sacred about private property? And it's like, nobody's even saying this stuff, but this is actually socialist rhetoric. And I'm not saying that because, I'm an anti-socialist or anything. I'm just trying to give you the intellectual foundation behind a lot of what Dr. Clarke says. A lot of what Dr. Clarke would tell you is, just like a Marxist reading of African history, and a very selective reading at that, because, as K.W. Don says, Mansa Musa was a private owner of wealth. And Mansa Musa, for those of us who might not know, he had many slaves, a lot of gold. He was considered the richest person in human history. Or he is considered the richest person in human history. So even today, when we might complain about Jeff Bezos or whomever, he's considered richer than Jeff Bezos. Or if we complain about Rockefeller and his influence, he's considered richer than Rockefeller. So it just kind of behooves us to say, oh, what's so sacred about private wealth, and then to give white people the honor of private property when, at the time of Mansa Musa, like, they weren't even a historic population. They weren't a significant population, particularly since Rome declined and all that.
So sacred about one man taking upon himself more than he could use in a lifetime, while people walking by this mountain of wealth starving. Nothing particularly sacred about this. And these things did not exist in these old societies until these old societies began to have internal differences.
Oh, sorry.
And the European came in, and the African naively permitted him to arbitrate an African family dispute until we understand.
Well, you see this? It's like you blame the white man for everything, which is, it's okay in a sense, but it's just not realistic. The European had, like Mansa Musa, Sunjata, a lot of these people have nothing to do with the European. Now, they might have something to do with the Asian, the Eurasian. If you said the Eurasian, makes a lot more sense. But if you're talking about this white boy, like, he's kind of a Johnny-come-lately. I think I might have actually borrowed that from Dr. Clarke, but he's kind of a Johnny-come-lately when it comes to this, enslavement process, and all that kind of stuff. And he just kind of took off a network that was already in place. But Africans, and again, he's going to paint this image of, oh, we just let them at the table. But the reality being that, unfortunately, they were a military threat by the time they showed up. And the reality is, you know, I'm going to tell you guys, I started playing this game. I shouldn't even tell you that, actually. Look, my thing is this, that the reality is that if you have a kingdom, okay, your kingdom is maintained based off of your guards, okay? You have a certain amount of guards, and the guards are keeping your kingdom the same way in you know, indefinitely, right? Now, if another people come in and kill off your guards, right, then you no longer have that kingdom. You understand? If another people, in fact, not only do you no longer have that kingdom, but technically the other people, if they can set up their own guards, they now have your kingdom. You know? And the belief that things shouldn't go that way is just human naivete. You know? And yes, of course, I would love to, you know, our people to be loyal to whatever it was, but if they're just going about their daily lives, they're not necessarily going to be fighting for you. If you maintain your power through your guards, and your guards are slain, you have lost your power. So, you know, when right now he's gonna tell you, oh yeah, you know, we just keep inviting them to sit down at the table. We keep inviting them. If they kill off your government, this is why I distinguish between nation and population. If they kill off the people in your nation, right? If they kill off the people in the government, right? Then the people really have little to do with it, you know, or little recourse. It's like I don't know if you guys heard, but you know, apparently there was this guy named Flynn. He's like in the I think he used to be maybe a national security advisor in the United States, and he's passing around this memo that says that Donald Trump should enact martial law in order to, you know, redo the election or something like that, right? And the thing is that it is outrageous in a sense, but in reality, okay, in reality, there's little that you can do as a people against martial law. Okay? In reality, there's little you can do as a people against martial law. Some of you will go out and protest, but a lot of people won't. Okay? And if they kill off the protesters, then it's just going to be the new way, the new order of things. And that's what happens all over the world, where somebody enacts martial law, and then it's the new way of things after the protesters die. Okay? After the protesters die, it's a new way of things. That's what we call a coup. Okay? And it's just a normal thing. So what colonization is a coup. Okay? And you might be like, oh, they're going to keep fighting. But the thing is that the community is not prepared to fight a professional military. Okay? It's not prepared to fight a professional military, because if it were, there would never have been that government over them in the first place. You understand? And this is actually partly why white folk talk about the sanctity of the Second Amendment and how, you know, how they should be armed all the time. And a lot of people are like, why should you always be armed? And you know, a part of it is, you know, obviously, even if you do have these arms, you're probably not going to take on a professional military. But that's part of the reason why you would be armed, in order to take on a professional military. You know, in the event of a martial decree. But of course, you know, some people will say, well, the irony being that, you know, Trump as a Republican would be trying to push this martial law, and then of course the people are going to defend him for doing it. But that's, you know, a whole other, you know, conversation altogether. Let me see if let me see. Oh yeah. So KW Don actually says, I think John Henry Clarke was trying to convey that African societies were more benevolent than European societies. More benevolent than European societies. Yeah, possibly, but again, he's doing it from the socialist paradigm of, because the thing is that he's repeating the Marxist rhetoric, that has nothing to do with Africa, where he's like, what's so sacred about public property? Or look at all this wealth that people are walking around with. Like, it really had nothing to do with African people. It's more, again, this is like one of the troubles with this time period, and of course our time period, is that we're looking at Africa through a European lens, while saying that that's exactly what we shouldn't be doing. You know? So it's just a little bit awkward. So not necessarily true. Semi-effective guerrilla warfare still being waged in places like Afghan by people in pajamas. Civil wars usually involve less than half of 1%. Oh yeah, so the Harsh Reality Podcast. So I know he's the Second Amendment. That's why I said it. I know that brother's on that Second Amendment. Every time I go on Twitter, he's just like, yo, these people. All right, but anyway, yeah. I mean, it's a semi-effective guerrilla warfare still being waged in places like Afghan. Yeah. I mean, war. One of the things about war is that you're supposed to cost the enemy. You know, you're supposed to drive the cost of the enemy. That's why but the thing is with America and its endlessly increasing military budget, that's like the only reason why this war is still going on, you know, because they can still somehow afford it. But usually you try to wait them out, and then when they leave, take over the government with your militarily armed force. But the thing is that white people do, like, the people in America don't want to leave and make it so that the people who are fighting them take over the government. But yeah, it could be effective, but this is the thing that, well, the good thing is that in America, like, they're not going to follow that protocol of martial law, because they know that at least they know that this election was legitimate, or the election wasn't stolen, or the public confidence is not in this whole, you know, conspiracy theory. But like you said, like less than half of 1% would participate. So if there was this idea that, oh, this election was stolen, blah blah blah, and then it was like, oh, martial law is decreed and Donald Trump's going to stay in the government, the reality is that a lot of people are just going to be like, okay, whatever, we thought this was going to happen, and this is why we blah blah blah, and that's it. And then America would just go into fascism, and we're just like, whatever, who cares? You know, a lot of people will be like that, you know, because things are gonna. Because the thing is that even when the government changes, things kind of don't change that much, regardless. You know, that's not just a quip, you know, regarding voting, but it's also a quip regarding just how life is, how you can't really micromanage people to a certain degree. Now, obviously, there might be some attempts made, and then, you know, there's going to be some rebellion, there's going to be some sort of so forth. So you don't really want to decay into that situation of this huge micromanagement. But at the end of the day, that's it. She says, this brother got me down to a T. Hello, it's a little brother. Good discussion. Yeah, only thing is that I'm not gonna talk about masks or nothing. Yeah, that's on you, right? You know, I'm like, yo, why does brother always? All right, now.
That on site, the African invited the European for dinner. That's the first thing he did. The Indian invited the European for dinner. The Polynesians invited the European for dinner. Now, if you invite people for dinner, you first place, you've got plenty dinner, and you have a society that is traditionally hospitable to strangers. The Indians invited Christopher Columbus for dinner, the first thing they did. All right, now let's look at what was happening inside of Christopher Columbus's mind.
All right, see, this is what I'm saying about the white focus thing. Well, no, one thing is the invited to dinner thing is not too realistic, because again, white people came here, you know, battleships, warships, guns, so on and so forth. Now, that's not to say that they didn't have any dinner, but again, if you look into the real history of a people, of any people, particularly like you go to the Native Americans, they did have this interaction with African people. Not only did they have this interaction with African people, but what he doesn't mention here is that Christopher Columbus had an African people on board, you know, who were able to bring Christopher Columbus and them to this modern world. Because the trade route between America and Africa is the swiftest way to get from Europe to America. You know, so you'd have to go down to Western Africa and then take this particular channel that just kind of like it zooms you over to the American East Coast or whatever. So it's like, yes, they did. If they did invite you for dinner, it's because the world was a globally trading world, and white people were the new kids on the block. You know, they were the newcomers on the global trade network. So yes, technically you would invite people into your home, or you would invite people for dinner, even if they're just new. You know, it's not really anything about it. It's not really particularly naive per se. You know, it's not really necessarily naive to, you know, treat new trading partners as trading partners. The only thing is, but again, it's not as innocent as we tend to portray it, in the sense that white people actually did show up with warships, actually did show up with rifles, actually did show up with you know, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, but again, notwithstanding that, you still, if there are traders, if there like the reality being that, you know, regardless of what population you may engage, all of them have negative and positive elements, or at least that's what it would look like from the outside, you know. So even if, so like, you couldn't necessarily always be suspicious of white people, because you would probably see, you know, you could, because even if you're black, you could see examples of bad black people, you know, and you can see examples of good white people, of good black people. So in the same sense, if you're black and you have white folk, it's not necessarily the case that you would universally say, oh yeah, no, we're not dealing with them. Although there were some populations that did say that, right? But it's not to say that every population would say that, and that's just a difference. But of course, white people also had their physical, like they had their technological superiority by this time, and that's a big difference. But from this, you know, this whole mindset of, oh well, they just psychologically tricked us, you know.
And we can go to his own diary for this. He said, I wonder why they're so friendly. They'll be easier to conquer than I thought they would be. I wonder why they're bringing such small amounts of gold. I wonder where the mines are. His intentions were not good. It wasn't good then. The intentions are not good now. And the black man is still hung up with this dinner invitation, this kindness, with the thought that if you treat a person humanely, that he will act humanely toward you. Black people have not seen white people at all. That is why they can't deal with them.
Yeah, see, and this is, again, like I said, this is that psychology, like, oh yeah, you know, we just don't see it. And it's like, no, again, you know, if they are organized militarily against you in a superior sense, then like your engagement has to change. Just like how Harsh Reality just said, guerrilla warfare. Harsh Reality did not say, you know, open field warfare. He said, okay, guerrilla warfare. And why he says that is to say that you have to have a tactical adjustment based off of what your enemy is coming with, you know. And unfortunately, that tactical adjustment is going to be, okay, we'll invite you for dinner, you know, because the reality being that even when it comes to guerrilla warfare, for instance, you know, it's effective. It's so effective. It's only so effective depending on like the situation that you're in, you know. Depending on the situation that you're in, it's only so effective. But for instance, if they're in your community, like you, like, all right, let's give it this way. You know, when white, like when we talk about guerrilla warfare in Kenya with the Mau Mau, right? We're talking about forest. Like you have to fight from the forest. You have to hide in the forest and fight in the forest, you know? And you had to like attack villages and go back into the forest, you know? But you had to abandon your home. And of course, not everybody went to become these guerrilla warriors. You know, most people could not just abandon their home, because if you abandon your home, you abandon everything. You abandon your wealth, you abandon your way of living, you abandon everything. So some people, in an effort to continue their way of living, will not join guerrilla warfare, because essentially, like some of the people who go into these forests, for what it's worth, it changes them. Like everything that you knew, or everything that you've been. Well, not everything. Like if you had training, if you already had forest training, then obviously, there's some stuff that you maintain. But most of your way of living, like your agricultural lifestyle, or like for us, our grocery lifestyle, right, is different in the forest. It's not there anymore. You're not hunting animals. You're now quiet. You're now hiding every day. You're now getting little sleep. You're now, in a constant state of warfare for years. For 5 years, 10 years, that kind of stuff. I mean, I can't tell you off the top of my head how long the Mau Mau Revolution was, but it could have been a decade. A lot of people didn't come out, because and a lot of it just a lot goes into not just guerrilla warfare, but a lot goes into that if you truly want to be aggressive against another people for in the ways of our revolutionary ancestors, you have to realize that aggression is not like, you're not gonna sit at our table, we're not gonna host your, that's, you literally have to abandon your home, because they will destroy it. They will firebomb it, or they have destroyed it. They destroyed countless villages, countless homes, countless lives. It's not. So if you choose to stay, you might have to, kowtow. You might have to kiss the ring. You might have to, because if you choose to stay, you almost have to surrender. You can't choose to stay. If you hold your ground, which a lot of people do, and if you hold your ground, you will be mowed down. Okay, because that is not guerrilla warfare. That is open warfare with a militarily superior enemy, and they will mow you down. And they have mowed down countless people. And then at the end of it, they say, "Will you cooperate?" And you either say yes or you say no. And if you say no, then you're dead forever. And if you say yes, then you are enslaved, at least for the time being, but possibly forever. And that's the sad truth. Brother says, Harsh Reality Podcast says, very true. Comfortability is the major detractor to a revolution per se. Many people cannot go a day without a phone, let alone survive in the bush. That's why protests are the preferred means of defiance. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Many people can't, come on. One time I was walking in New York, right? And I saw this kid, this young man, and I think his kid was in the back seat of his car, or something like that, or no, his kid was maybe in his hands or something, and he wanted to put him in the car because it's cold, but there's snow on the tire, or maybe on the door, and he couldn't open the door, so he's daintily kicking at the snow, not kicking, but brushing off the snow with his shoes, so that he doesn't mess up his shoes. Okay, so he doesn't mess up his shoes. He's letting his kid freeze or something like that, right? Just so that, this guy is, when I saw this dude, I was like, yeah, these people ain't trying to go to war with no white folk. Just kill the rhetoric, because if it, one of the rules of warfare, it's written by, it's one of those passed down knowledge, whatever. One of the rules of warfare is to accustom your soldiers to, I think it's maybe gritty conditions or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's accustom your soldiers to just a rugged lifestyle. And the thing is that we as a people are so not like that. We don't want our shoes to be scuffed. It's like sometimes you're online and there's a picture of a black person, a black man doing something, and then everybody just zooms in, yo, look what he's doing to the soles of his shoes, and you're just like, what? That's what you're worried about? The soles of his shoes, not even your shoes, and you're worried about the thing, oh man, he's messing up. Oh, we gotta pray for him. Blah blah. It's just weird. So yeah, no. The idea of, because the thing is like when you talk about the Maroons, they were fighting for a decade. We talk about the Haitian Revolution, that was a decade. Talking about the Mau Mau Revolution, that's a decade. You're talking about a decade of warfare. You know, and this is the same people whose attention span is short. You know, like 3 days. Like one day we're like, oh, the lady who interviews Michael Jackson, right? They're like, oh, we don't like you. Like she's like worse than Oprah or something. They're like, oh, we don't like you. Maybe even Oprah. I don't know. But like, oh, we don't like you. 3 days later, she's forgotten. And she even says, oh, people are advising her, don't even talk about it. It's gonna blow over. People are gonna forget it. And sure enough, people forgot it. As soon as she does like another interview with like whatever, they're like, oh, this is a good interview. You gotta go see it. Nobody's concerned about black people. Nobody really sees a real threat coming from black people. And I mean, again, like it partly goes back to the rhetoric, you know, from here, where it's just this, it's kind of imaginary, it's imagination, it's, oh, we're different from you white people. You white people just stole everything we got, and it's like there's nothing really there. It's really just, it's kind of like a discussion on white power and just like an acceptance of white power. It's not really, you know, like it's just depressing that it doesn't advance from here, you know. It's just depressing that it doesn't advance from here.
I'll say one, but I think we have to be careful, black people. We too much tied up in this what's good and what's bad. I think what we need to begin to look at is what's real. Now, I don't care whether it's good or bad. I just care whether it works, whether it doesn't work, whether it helps black people or doesn't help black people. White people are individualistic. White people are materialistic. I think Dr. Clarke is absolutely correct in the definition of black civilization, African civilization. Communalistic, whole concept is different. But the white man's individualism and materialism stems from the fact that he comes out of a situation, a place where you could hardly live. You know, the barren land where you could hardly grow, no resources, where they had to fight each other just to keep alive, and where each person had to try to steal all he could to keep somebody else from getting it so he could stay alive. Now that builds individualism and materialism. Now he didn't have much in the way of materialism, but he had the need, the desire, so he built ships, he built guns, everything in order to take something from somebody else. Now you got to realize that the black man came up in a different, wholly different kind of environment, where there was everything that a person needed. They didn't have to cheat and lie and steal to get enough to eat. Enough to eat was everywhere. Nobody had to take from somebody else. All the resources of the world were right there in the ground. They had everything. They didn't need to build ships and go conquer someplace else. If Africans built a ship, where would they go? Any place they went was worse than where they were.
Well, you see, and this is what I'm saying. Like, this is something that you already hear. Like, you could tell this is something that we say today. You know, it's not even realistic because, you know, we know that black people did travel the world. Okay? We know that black people, you know, like I just said, we engaged and interacted with Native Americans. We know that we had a presence in India. We know we had a presence in China. We know we had a presence. We know we had traded with people in China, the Silk Road, the so on and so forth. We know that we traveled. We know that white people didn't just decide to build guns. We know that those guns that they quote unquote built were the guns that were used against them by the Moors. Because, you know, if you look at the image of the Moors and like you look up Moor castles, and I can probably look that up for you, but when you look it up, you'll see that they have, you know, that the black people are have cannons against the quote unquote. Actually, let me just look it up for you. You know what I mean? Let's say Moor castles, right? Hopefully, let's just see if we can find something. All right, we want to look up a painting, but you know, well, obviously these castles were made by, well, some people would say that they're made by black folk. I think this might be a good image. Okay, you probably can't see the cannons in this one, so that's like only the bad thing. Let me see if you guys can see it on your screen. Yeah. Let me see. Let me go back to this. Okay, it's not. I can't really see it or zoom in, but you kind of see, like, there's a black person, or you see the complexion of the people fighting versus the complexion of the people in the castle. For some reason, the people in the castle have like European-styled hair, but you kind of see what it is though. Like, of course, you see the bows here. In other images, you might see cannons. Again, you see this the how these people are darker than the people attacking. I wanna see if there's the, let's see. Let me see if I can find canon. Cause that's the thing that we have to, that we want to realize, is that the cannons were in the castle, you know. The cannons were in the castle, and the Moors were in the castle, you know. But yeah, I can't really find it. I don't want to waste too much time searching for something that, you know, because the other thing the reason why I don't want to search randomly is because you never know if there's like some weird way some image shows up, you know, and then you know, your video got to be taken down or something, you know.
But the white man could build a ship and go any place, because any place he went was better than where he was. Anything that he could take was better than what he already had. So we're dealing with the cultures of two people that stem from the kind of situation in which they live. Black people today are trying to be individualistic and materialistic because we are now in a slave culture. The white man has dominated us so completely, we try to...
Yeah, exactly. This is untrue. Harsh Reality says this is true. Parts of Africa are very harsh living. Now, it doesn't get as cold as Eurasia. However, the landscape of Africa present challenges as well. Destruction of black civilizations breaks all this down. Exactly. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like we're kind of going by this quote unquote, you know, pseudoscience, and sort of with oh, Europe is such a bad living, and it's like Europe really wasn't that bad living, particularly if you're talking about Southern Europe, where you can have where like the Romans and the Greeks were, like it. And again, the white people were not necessarily on some colonial rampage up until they got from under the Moors. You know, they weren't necessarily, oh, we got to go find. And the thing is, another thing that I want to point out too is that, like, if you go into how the white people are structured, you know, technically not all of them were pioneers and traveling and looking for so on and so forth. A lot of them were just oppressed populations. That's it. They were just oppressed populations. They weren't necessarily... So this whole, oh, they developed this individualistic mindset, you know, doesn't even really add up from what really would have happened, you know? Because again, the way how most... This is why I say that a lot of us don't really seem to get is that, you know, you have to differentiate between the nation and the population, you know? When we read The Prince... You know, I was talking about, you know, like you could say the principality, the prince, and the population in a sense. But the thing is that, you know, the nation is really like what's going on. You know, the population doesn't really do all that much stuff. You know, the population doesn't have wealth like that. The nation has the wealth. You know, the population, the individual peasant isn't, you know, oh, I gotta have this individual mindset, and I gotta go colonize the world, and I gotta go build these guns, you know. But the king, or actually, I remember Bitter Medicine podcast was talking about how even in Africa, you know, like you if you had a standing army, you know, and this is just a normal thing, a normal thing in the world or in human history, if you will. But if you had a standing army, you had to pay that army regularly. But you didn't necessarily want them to just chill around in the village, or chill around in the kingdom or whatever. So you would send them out. You would send them out, you know, abroad on some, you know, either adventure or whatever, or just to fight some enemy somewhere. But you'd want to, you know, one, get your money's worth, two, not have them at home all the time. You know, always have them have, you know, perpetual warfare in a sense. And that's really like kind of like where you would get this quote unquote colonization. You know, you have these armies of Europe. Again, you know, after the Europeans defeat the Moors at what was called, I think, Granada, right? After they finally defeat the Moors, what they do then is that they have this huge military. They have this technology. They have these maps. They have these maps from these Moors who were defeated. They have this technology from the Moors who were defeated. They have this huge military. What are they supposed to do? Now they could just disband the military and then, you know, sit by and let the Moors, you know, come back and enslave them, or they can go out and, you know, try to acquire wealth and, you know, not keep their military at home. You know, it's a lot going on in human history. I actually do want to mention this game that I have this brother. Like I said, sometimes my brothers would tell me to thing. I just downloaded it. It's not too bad, but it kind of does go into this whole, you know, like kingdom management kind of thing. And I don't actually want to. Actually, I don't want to advertise video games, so I'm not gonna say that. All right. But I mean, if you want, you could text me and say, hey, what's a game that I, you know, blah blah blah. All right.
Tape was better than what he already had. So we're dealing with the cultures of two people that stem from the kind of situation in which they live. Black people today are trying to be individualistic and materialistic because we are now in a slave culture. The white man has dominated us so completely, we try to accept his values. What we've got to do is reject his values, go back and accept the old values that come from Africa, our own historic black values, and have a black value system that we put in opposition to the white man's materialism and individualism.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. This week we have presented a black paper on white racism, part 1. We have discussed education, history, and Christianity, and how these institutions in a racist pattern affect the lives and mentality of black people. Next week we will present part 2. We will deal next week with values and culture, war, colonialism, and imperialism, and personality development or psychology.
All right. So, and I just stopped it so you guys don't see my recommended or nothing. Yeah, I mean, it's nothing bad. It's probably I got a few of these nonsense videos, but anyway, that was the video. I don't know if what you guys thought about that. I don't know what you guys thought about that. Me personally, listening to that, I'm just like, it mirrors. Like, I feel like it's something that could have been done today, and if it were done today, I would have been rolling my eyes. You know, but I give it a pass because it was 50 years ago. I say, you know what, you know, it's a decent concept from 50 years ago, but the idea that this is the same rhetoric that's going on today, I don't really like. What was the title of this podcast? I can't remember. But I think it was, oh yeah, why haven't we collectively advanced? So one of the things that I would say is this, that technically we haven't built the schools. We haven't built the schools to actually be more advanced than this mentality. So a lot of the mentality that goes on today is in fact due to a lot of people self-educating themselves by looking at the videos of the past. You know, as to say that there's no real formalized way for Africans to start thinking, you know, beyond the 50s, beyond the 70s, because we kind of cling on to the literature of the 70s and the intellectuals of the 70s, or 60s, 80s, whatever, 90s. You know, basically we just continue that same tradition, like on an individual basis, or how we explore knowledge. What I could say is, well, obviously I'm going to do a plug. You know, if you want to advance beyond that, if you liked my take on this video, or if you think that you want to learn more along those lines, you know, definitely check out the books that I have. Check out the Book of Power. Check out so on and so forth. I'm also going to tell you to come through onto the Discord. The link is in the description. You can check out the Discord. We have tons of free books there, and you can engage that as well. I believe that if we were to build like one of the things that when we build a nation or even just a school, we can transform our intellectual engagement against, you know, quote unquote racism. But I want to say this, that, you know, technically, collectively, we will never advance beyond this point, you know, because unfortunately, if we're talking about America or whatever, as long as you're under another people's nation, you are subject to their national laws and so on and so forth. And because you're subject to their laws, they're not going to allow you to advance beyond this particular stage where you're just kind of, you know, like barking at the white folk, you know. They're not going to allow you to. So it's like allowance, you know. And that's really like what it comes down to. Just the reality that as long as you're in other people's nations, you should not expect to be free. You know, you should not expect to be free. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to look into nation building from an African-centered perspective, or from an African, you know, philosophical, critical analysis kind of perspective, definitely, like I said, check out the Book of Power. Otherwise, you've been listening to the pro-black perspective on KWAZ Radio. Thank you so much to the chat for engaging this conversation. Thanks to all the people who gave likes. I'm not really going to thank the people who gave dislikes, but it is what it is, right? And thank you so much for joining me tonight, and have a wonderful evening, and continued growth, for years to come. This has been Onitaset Kumat, and I appreciate your time. Shamim Hotep.